Hi there, all you critical thinkers. I'm Brad Hartley, and once again, this is Critical Mass TV. It's Sunday, May 25th, 2014, and we have something special for you tonight. On April 9th, Tom Goldtooth, Executive Director of the Indigenous Environmental Network, spoke at St. Michael's College about the vast destruction of the air, water, and land taking place all over the world, and what his organization and other Native communities and organizations are doing to stop it. I hope you enjoy sharing his perspective and observing his masterful use of mixed mental arts for our intellectual self-defense. The video and the talk was a bit longer than the hour we have together, so without further discussion, here is Tom Goldtooth. Enjoy.
And I'm from Greenup, and I'm here to introduce Tom. So before coming to college here at St. Michael's, I felt as though I had been sheltered from the environmental injustice that some people face on a daily basis. It's one thing to know carbon dioxide is increasing the atmosphere, but another thing to hear about it and be able to connect a face and a personal story to the effects of increased carbon. But now, through hearing firsthand accounts, I feel as though my understanding of our impact on the environment has a new perspective to it. Awareness and acknowledgement of these issues allows us to feel the problems on a more personal level than numbers on a paper. In my Peace and Justice class last semester, I did my final paper on environmental racism, and one thing I said in that essay was, to have heart, you need to have courage to stand up for what you believe in, and to have moral conscience to do what's right. Tom Goldtooth is standing up for what he believes in, and is constantly raising awareness of the injustice that Indigenous communities face every day. Tom Goldtooth is one of the North America's most prominent Indigenous activists, and he is the Executive Director at Indigenous Environment Network, based in Minnesota. The Indigenous Environment Network is a grassroots organization that formed in order to address environmental and economic justice issues. For over 3 decades, Tom has been an environmental advocate and economic justice leader within the Native American community, and has built an organization of 250 indigenous communities that organize around issues of energy extraction, globalization, water, and indigenous rights. Tom is also a co-founder of the Global Climate Justice Now Network, a leading voice for rights for Mother Nature, and a member of the Indigenous Caucus to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Tom co-produced Drumbeat for Mother Earth, a documentary feature film describing the effects of bioaccumulative chemicals on indigenous communities, which has been awarded Best Environmental Documentary at the New York International Independent Film and Video Festival. Tom has also honored in 2010 by the Sierra Club and by NAACP as Green Hero of Color. From his participation and leadership in many of these environmental groups and conferences, he has become an environmental justice leader not only in his community, but globally as well. It is my pleasure to present to you Tom Goldtooth.
I didn't know I did all those things. Hello, yat haumitakyapi. Chante heart washdea nape chia sapido. In a good way, I shake all your hand. It's good to be here, and I'm honored to have been invited. I said yat for those of you that might know what that means, anyone know about the Navajo people, Diné people from the Southwest? Raise all your hand. All right. And then my other side is the Dakota people from Minnesota, the Kantuans, the dwellers of the sacred lakes. And it was good to meet with some of the students and faculty earlier, and we had a really good exchange. So, how many native indigenous people here, even if it's something your grandma said, hey, I got some Cherokee as part of me, or what? How many native people here? Raise your hand. All right, stand up. Look at each other and say, just nod like this. Go like this, go. All right, say aho. Aho, okay. How many activists how many defenders of Mother Earth and the environment who are here? Raise your hand. Stand up, please. All right. All right. Okay, you can sit down. How many students of this university are here? Raise your hand. Oh, majority of you. Excellent. How many faculty? 1, 2, 3. It's good to have the faculty here. I recognize one of the faculty members here. We had a good dinner earlier. And who else? How many people of the human race? Some of you aren't raising your hand. Some of you, I hope you have a belly button. Whether it's an innie or an outer, eh? Because if you don't, welcome. 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 I really thought about what I was going to talk about, and the invitation left it open for me. And there's a whole realm of different things I could talk about. I could give you a crash course in what it is to be Native American, an indigenous person living today in this industrialized society, this modern world. I could give you the whole history of colonization. I could talk about acculturation and assimilation. I could talk about the education system. I could talk about social justice in addition to environmental justice. I could even probably just talk about what res life is about. How many people know the term res life? Does that mean you've been on or close to an Indian reservation, eh? Okay, res life. There's something unique coming from a rural, in most cases rural, a rural area, remote, where just going down to get a pizza is not an option. Where just going down to get a soda pop is not an option. Just having gas money to get to the nearest C-store, convenience store, is not an option. I come from two worlds. One is my mom, Diné, Navajo, and grew up on the reservation, remote area near the Colorado River, in the canyon lands of Lee's Ferry, where the settlers, that was the only place that the settlers were able to cross the canyon of the Colorado River. I grew up not far from there, about 4 miles. And then later in my life, I found I had other relatives on the Dakota side that started another journey of getting to know my Dakota relatives. And so I greeted you in our Dakota way. With that said, I want to talk about a number of different things. I really did some soul searching whether I was going to stand up here and weave a story, or do I want to be specific on some messages that I've been talking about recently. And my worry that I don't miss the words, I don't miss the message that I want to talk about, because we are at a critical time right now, in time and space, critical time in this reality of many different things are happening, from the financial situation, not only of the United States, but of the world, but also the climate crisis, and also another area that's very dear to me, as well as our network, is the depletion and the destruction of our natural resources, whether it's in the oceans, and now we're finding little pieces of plastic in the oceans, and the pollution of the oceans, but the depletion of the fish, or whether it's our trees. And as I was flying in here, it reminded me of Minnesota, except you have hills and mountains here. So, we come from the land of 10,000 lakes, and the lakes are still frozen up north where I live in Bemidji, Minnesota, downstream from the headwaters of the Mississippi River. The sap is running. I'm in Vermont, and we do have somewhat of a competition for Minnesota and Vermont on your maple syrup. And how many people go out in sugar bush? Good, good. Yeah, good. My family's out. They were out this past weekend. And we go and get it when you can. It's hard work. And so on my Facebook, you may see Tom Goldtooth. I have a Facebook. And it's supposed to be personal, you know, where I share personal things. But I can't get away from that. I guess I've been coined as an activist. So I post activist-related things to environmental justice, treaty rights. And every now and then I post something personal. I notice I get more visitors and more sharing when I post something personal. But I can't get away from just talking about, you know, putting out the information of what's happening. So I did post a picture of my daughter, Anna, and her husband, and my grandson, Jabishkan, that they're out in Sugar Bush. And you see a picture of 3 55-gallon drums that have been cut off, and there's a heavy-duty wire, and there's 3 containers of the sap that's boiling in our outdoor configuration of what was created for wood fire. Okay, so I honor the ones who are out there, not letting the sap go to waste, because I want to talk about that. So as an introduction, yeah, I'm the executive director of the Indigenous Environmental Network, and we're based in Minnesota. That's because I lived there. If I was living in Albuquerque, New Mexico, it would have been based in Albuquerque. But the board, the founding board, were okay with that because we had debated, do we, as we form this network of many voices, do we put this network maybe in the beltway of this country where political decisions are made, policy decisions are made? Do we put it in Washington, D.C.? Washington, D.C., where the National Congress of the American Indians is at, which was created in the 1940s by American Indian tribes to be a voice of the federal recognized tribes. And what does that say about state recognized tribes or unrecognized tribes? But pretty much they work very close with federal policies and the United States government, and many good things as well. But our decision is that no, we're not going to be based in the Beltway. of the Washington, D.C., that we need to remain close to the land, because by being close to the land, that keeps us honest. That keeps us in our reality that's connected to what we call the original instructions. So we were established in 1990 during a time when there was a lot of private waste industries coming into Indian country. And I use that word sometimes, Indian country, with these get-rich schemes, promising that telling our people that we can be our brother's keeper, not only in toxic waste, but nuclear waste as well. And the government formed a nuclear waste negotiator to negotiate with all governments, municipal, state government, and tribal governments, to be a voluntary host for and monitor the retrievable storage system to store highly radioactive waste from the nuclear reactors, the spent fuel rods. And because we're in this situation as American Indians, as indigenous people, as Native nations, to where, in my analysis, we're kept in a poverty situation. The only thing we have to negotiate is land and natural resources. So they have a paradigm of developing contracts to extract minerals, to clear cut our forests. Some of the intertribal organizations like the Council of Energy Resource Tribes, or these other entities like the National Congress of American Indians, part of their goal is to renegotiate those contracts so that we get a better return, so that there's more of a cost benefit that respects the equity issues. So some of these organizations like Council of Energy Resource Tribes was formed in the 70s as the OPEC of Indian country. I'm sharing this with you because it also demonstrates some of the conundrums, some of the contradictions that have been created by this federal government as a colonial government to divide and conquer its First Nation peoples. So IEN was developed by grassroots people that said no to all this, that our rights are not for sale, that our trees are not for sale, that the uranium in the ground is not for sale, that the coal in the ground of my grandma's people, the Navajo Diné people, is not for sale. These are the lungs of Mother Earth. This is the kidneys of Mother Earth. This is the liver of Mother Earth. These were interventions and testimonies that were brought to the United Nations during those years of the 70s and the 80s by our grassroots people demanding environmental justice and recognitions of their rights. And the United States back in those days used to say, well, who are you? They said, well, we come from Big Mountain. We're trying to stop Peabody Mining Company. And they have supporters like you, the Big Mountain support groups that organize throughout the world now. And the government and the State Department representatives of this colonial government said, who are you? We are the Diné people, the traditional people of the land. This is Grandma Roberta Blackgoat. She mostly speaks Navajo. They said, well, no, we only recognize the Navajo modern electoral tribal government. They are the real leaders. See what happens. What happens? It happens in Canada as well. So we were organized by grassroots Native Indigenous peoples with the conscience of their relationship with Mother Earth. So we were organized to address a rights-based approach to environmental protection, to conservation of our natural resources. And there was a lot of discussion that took 5 years by our national council at the time, which later became a board of directors. to discussing what do we call ourselves. Because most of our constituency are traditional people. What do I mean by traditional people? Compared to progressives. The progressives of acculturation and assimilation that want part of the American dream. My mom is like that. Out of respect, I say my mom is like that. My mom was the first Native woman, the first Navajo woman to get her degree in microbiology and became a medical technologist. She ran labs, eventually ran a hospital for the Navajo Nation. My stepfather at the time was a traditionalist. So I was always tugged both ways. Tugged this way and I tugged that way. Going to ceremonies and this way, and then wanting to encourage my mom to, be a better Indian. And so I know both worlds on our res life. I know both worlds. But my passion is with the traditionalism. My passion is to revitalize our languages. My passion is to demand justice in Indian country. So back in those years of the late 80s and early 90s, when there was reports coming out that there was racism that existed in the federal policies around environmental protection, I started to look at that. That was no different in Indian country. When federal laws were developed, like the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, in the early 70s, there was legal provisions that allowed state governments to receive delegated authority to develop their environmental protection programs at the state level. The federal government never wanted to do that. But it completely left out American Indian tribes and Alaska Natives. Those of you that study environmental management, environmental laws, you probably know that already. Some of you may not, because sometimes the American Indian is off the radar screen of America. So if there's no provision for a tribe to organize like the state government, because we are also sovereign entities, we enter into treaty agreements with the United States. And yes, every one of those treaties have been broken. So we have also the ability and the right to develop our own air standards, our own water standards, our own solid waste programs, our own pollution prevention, our own water programs to protect our environment. But our tribes were never told that. A few attorneys, native attorneys who went and got their degrees and came back to the reservation did find that out. Like Gail Small, part of our network back in the 90s. She formed a group called Native Action in Montana, a lawyer that came back to the Northern Cheyenne. And she said to her tribal council, we can receive our own designation to develop our own Clean Air Act program, our own program, and receive the delegated authority. And they were being encroached upon by the coal mining industry, who already negotiated a deal with the Crows, the Crow Nation, the Crow tribe. But she was effective. So that's part of that breed, that's part of that momentum that was being created by our young generation that went to school, learned some of the tools of the white man, studied the laws, and came back to our res life to use those laws to protect our sovereignty, our self-determination. And that's why we understood when these reports came out of environmental racism, that when it comes to the siting of landfills and toxic waste sites and toxic facilities, that people of color communities are usually approached first, including Native people. And that's how we got involved with this movement called environmental justice, to